Welcome back to the pit wall, because the Chinese Grand Prix delivered one of the most chaotic race weekends we've seen in a long time. We had two cars failing to start the race, a dominant performance from Mercedes, a frustrated world champion, and now an argument brewing about whether Formula One's new 2026 cars are actually good for racing at all. Yes, the debate has already started. But here's the strange thing, despite all the drama on track in Shanghai, the biggest story might actually be what happens next, because comments from Max Verstappen have already triggered a response from Toto Wolff. And if history tells us anything, when drivers and team bosses start arguing about regulations, things usually escalate very quickly. So today, we're breaking down everything that came out of the Chinese Grand Prix, from Kimi Antonelli's victory to McLaren's shocking failure before the race even started. And trust me, some of these stories could shape the entire 2026 season. Let's start with a man who quietly dominated the entire afternoon, Kimi Antonelli. While chaos unfolded behind him, the Mercedes driver simply did what great drivers tend to do. He controlled the race. Lap after lap he managed the gap to teammate George Russell, rarely putting a wheel wrong. At one stage, the gap stretched to several seconds. The only real moment of tension came late in the race when Antonelli locked up slightly and ran wide, but even that didn't threaten the result. He calmly brought the car home to win the Chinese Grand Prix. Another huge result for Mercedes. After the race, Antonelli spoke emotionally about the team, saying Mercedes had helped him achieve his dream of racing at the very top level. But here's the question, are we watching the start of another Mercedes era of dominance? Because if Shanghai showed us anything, Mercedes currently looked like the team everybody else is chasing. Now, while Mercedes was celebrating, McLaren were having a weekend they'll probably want to erase from memory, because both McLaren cars failed to even start the race. Yes, both. Defending world champion Lando Norris never even made it to the dummy grid after engineers discovered a serious electrical issue roughly an hour before the race. Mechanics removed the floor and inspected multiple systems trying to fix it, but nothing worked. The car simply wouldn't fire up. And then somehow, things got worse, because teammate Oscar Piastri also failed to start, with a completely separate electrical problem. 2 cars, 2 failures, 0 racing laps. Which is the worst possible start if you're trying to mount a championship challenge. But interestingly, McLaren are already talking about how they recover from this. Inside the team, the reference point is 2023, the season where McLaren started poorly before turning things around dramatically mid-year. So the question is, can McLaren pull off another comeback, or has the damage already been done? Then we come back to Max Verstappen. For the former world champion, Shanghai ended in complete frustration. First came a poor launch that dropped him deep into traffic, then came the midfield battles, and finally, the retirement. His Red Bull slowed dramatically before he was forced to pull over, another reliability issue on a weekend where electrical problems seemed to affect several teams. But what really grabbed attention wasn't just the retirement, it was Max Verstappen's comments about the 2026 regulations. The Dutch driver has been openly critical of the new cars, suggesting they don't always produce the kind of racing that drivers enjoy. At one point, he hinted that the current generation of cars doesn't always feel like real racing, which is a pretty strong thing to say, especially when you're a former world champion. But the moment those comments started spreading around the paddock, someone responded. That someone was Toto Wolff. When asked about Verstappen's criticism, the Mercedes boss wasn't particularly concerned. In fact, Wolff pointed out that the racing in Shanghai had been extremely entertaining. And honestly, he's got a point. We saw overtakes throughout the field, multiple strategy shifts, and constant midfield battles. From a fan's perspective at least, the race was packed with action. So now we have an interesting divide emerging in Formula One. Drivers questioning the feel of the cars, fans enjoying the spectacle. So who's right? And could this argument about the 2026 regulations turn into the next big political fight in Formula One? Because if history tells us anything, those debates can escalate really quickly. And speaking of entertainment, the midfield battle in Shanghai was absolutely brilliant. At one stage, we had 2 Alpines, 2 Hasses and Verstappen all fighting over the same positions. Pierre Gasly, Oliver Bearman, Esteban Ocon and Franco Colapinto were trading places lap after lap. Drivers had spent most of the weekend complaining about how these new cars feel, but from a viewer's perspective, it looked fantastic. 5 cars, constant overtakes, non-stop pressure. Sometimes Formula One can overcomplicate things, because whatever the drivers might think, that kind of racing is exactly what fans want. And while everyone was reacting to the race, another story started circulating. 2 races on the calendar, the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, have been scrapped, which immediately raises questions about the future of the Formula 1 calendar, because the races have disappeared, but something usually replaces them. New venues, a reshuffled schedule, but Formula 1 has actually cancelled these races without replacing them. So prepare yourselves for April, because there won't be any racing. So the Chinese Grand Prix gave us a lot to think about. Mercedes look incredibly strong. McLaren are suffering a seriously disastrous weekend. Verstappen is questioning the new regulations, and an ongoing debate about whether these new cars are delivering the kind of racing Formula 1 really wants. But the biggest takeaway might be this: the 2026 season is still wide open, because if Shanghai showed us anything, momentum in Formula 1 can change very, very quickly. One weekend you're dominating, and the next you're stuck in a garage with an electrical fault. And that leads to one final question. Was the Chinese Grand Prix just a chaotic one-off? Or is this the start of a very unpredictable Formula 1 season? Because if it's that second option, we could be in for something very special. Thanks for watching the Pit Wall. Be sure to like, subscribe and comment your thoughts from Shanghai. Join us in the week for updates from the teams and the reaction from China.